can keep coming back to throughout all of PACE is just dealing with the fact that a lot of times we are confronted with jargon words, very policy related technical terms, and things that might not be super, let's say, familiar to ourselves, but also folks in our community. And so there's kind of two aspects of this. One is the translating of jargon into English, right? Like translating confusing terms, technical terms into something that we can understand. And then the other aspect that we wanted to focus on today is also specifically translating them into Spanish, because a lot of us are working with Spanish speaking folks. And so really that's the main purpose of this session, is to generate a short guide around some of the common words we've seen and how we try to convey important concepts in climate equity work, whether that's de-jargonifying them or actually directly translating them. And we wanted to, of course, keep in mind that we can translate things, but sometimes that doesn't mean it's already explained well just by translating it, right? And so we also want to surface, your all's experience with how do you address with communities, with community members, some of these complex concepts. How have you been able to sort of explain, or just, to really ground the conversation in a shared understanding? And then another thing we want to hopefully have some time for at the end is just to touch upon any other sort of issues of language justice, sort of more broadly, that we know that access to being able to participate in processes in your own language and in a language that you can understand, whether that's literally like language, but also, again, accessibility of that language, is an aspect of justice. And so we want to think about what are other ways we might be addressing that in our work beyond just this sort of technical work of translating terms, right? So yeah, that's basically the arc of what we're gonna do today. Natalie's gonna take us through some tools that she's discovered and used, and we're gonna do like an activity, but just around looking at some of the stuff we've already had translated and look at a list of glossary terms. And yeah, this again, and just, to be clear, we're not trying to, Natalie and I, tell you like what's the right way to use the terms. Like to us, some of these things are totally confusing, or we're not sure always how to do it either. So we're looking at all of our collective wisdom as the source of what we're going to be, mobilizing. So so that's today. And yeah, I'll turn it over to Natalie. And of course, if you have any questions or comments, happy to hear them.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I want to mention is we probably all come into this space with different levels, right, of Spanish, and we want to recognize that and hear how people are navigating the complexities of like the experiences we bring to this work. So if you look at the first bolded heading that says discuss tools, resources to translate English to Spanish, or like Spanish to English, one of the tools that I use is called Lingui. And I like Lingui because it has sometimes when I translate into it, like something like capacity building, we had to do like more technical translations for the PACE website when we were translating into Spanish. And I was able to use that website. If you did want to put capacity building, I'll actually share my screen. It gives you a number of different translations, and in Spanish it's desarrollo de capacidad, but it also gives like other terms that might be less frequent but have been used. And I don't think we ended up going with this one. We might have gone with programa de capacitación. And then I like the translations here that were showing what other like nonprofits were using to say capacity building. And that's one of the reasons I like this tool. And I'm curious if others have like a favorite web tool that they use when they're doing translations.
Natalie, this is Ileana. I like word reference.
Use word reference?
Yeah. they do a lot of different languages. I came across this when I was in grad school. And I like it because in the themes, like if you have colloquialisms or like phrases, oftentimes you can go down to like the bottom and they'll have professional translators kind of weighing in and discussing the pros and cons of how to phrase something. So I feel like not only do I get the definition, but I also get like the dialogue. Yeah, so all of those are all instances when people that you kind of scrolled past it, but at the bottom there was all kinds of threads on how to translate capacity building. Yep, discussions. Yep.
Oh, this one's the forum. Okay.
Yeah, so all of those are different threads where
Mhm.
people talk to each other about how to say something in a given type of context. Yeah.
I think this is great because this is kind of what we're hoping to do today and just in general is that we recognize that like there's no perfect translation always the right one, but it's rather based on a lot of factors. And so you need to have some sort of more contextual understanding often.
Yeah.
Let me go back. This is great, Liana. Does anyone else have something else they want to add?
I've also used DeepL as just a quick go-to translator.
Okay. Can you drop that one into the chat or do you want me to go to it?
I can do that. And I also wanted to mention with another organization I work with, we've got a database of a bunch of tools that are related to like ending oppression work and the environment in general. And it's not so much all of these technical terms, but I could share that whole database.
That would be great.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen on this document, I think it was Serena had shared with us a series of documents that were also sort of translation documents for, I think that was specifically for kinds of planning and such. But yeah, we definitely want to, of course, share all those resources.
Okay, so what's the best?
If you can either drop it in the chat right now, or if you have access to this doc, I think you should be able to add it directly.
Okay, and then the permission should just be that anybody with the link.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, anyone with the link should be able to edit.
Mm-hmm.
So I will drop that into the chat again. Okay. Great. Okay, the other two that I wanted to mention is sometimes I'll go into Google and see so say that I found like capacity building. What did I say? Programa de capacitación, I think. Google. This is my map. Because that's not what I want. Google. Programa.
There you go.
And then I'll like just see if other, this is a little advanced, but I'll see like if other orgs are using that word. And if it comes up that they aren't, then I'm like, okay, well, maybe this is right. And this is a good example because sometimes going to Wikipedia will also give you a sense of like if that word is being used widely. And this one doesn't have it in English, which is odd. But maybe someone else give me like a technical term that we're trying to use.
Mitigation.
Mitigation. Okay. Let me just do wikipedia.org. Look up climate mitigation. Who wants to do climate change mitigation? And then this is the very technical English page, but what I wanted to show is you can go to the Spanish page and just double check like the word that they're giving. So sometimes for me, like the translations actually take like 3 checks. It's like, okay, let me see what the translation is on Lingui. Let me just double check on Google or like Wikipedia that that's a terminology that someone in this field is using just to double check. So that's why sometimes translations I think can take a little while. Um, and then even if this is too technical, like how to say climate change mitigation, is it like reducing the amount of miles we drive is another way to like explain that in um, lay terms.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, guys, I was late. I was on another call, but happy to be here. Um, and one of the things that I wanted to, I've been just like tracking like words that are used, and they're not even words that people understand in English,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the idea that when we are really working with community members that want to get involved, and we, you know, rely on these scientific words, it's either we make the attempt to really allow people to challenge themselves to be learners and work and talk in scientific language, versus meeting them where they're at, where we want them to be more responsible in decision making and interpret, right? And I think that's what you're talking to, Natalie, is like, do we want to use those scientific terms, or is there something that's used more colloquially, right?
Mm-hmm.
And carbon sequestration doesn't even really compute for most people, but growing a garden does, you know. And there's something in the middle that we have to work to. And in my health education work, they pretty much tell us that it's a 3rd to 4th grade language or reading level that you would want to translate things into. And that's why when all your health materials and all of that are very simple language and sometimes not the correct medical language, it's because the practice is that we really think about the variability in terms of people's linguistics, and then also how it varies from culture to culture, right? And so I think the 3rd to 4th grade language and making sure that it is used colloquially is really wise. And that's just in Spanish. I can't even speak about all the other languages that are needed.
Mm-hmm. So I am trying to take notes on this as we're talking. We have a question here, like, what do translation processes look like in your community? And it sounds like, Anita, like, you don't want to rely on scientific terms, want to meet community members where they are at, meet community members where they are at. And then I did note you're growing a garden, because I think that's great.
Mm-hmm.
And we have it as like under another way to say sequestering carbon, right?
Mm-hmm. And just, I wanted to bring something in here, which is that it sounds like from hearing Anita talk, like one of the things we're attentive to is like, what's the purpose of the discussion of that translation, right? Or that topic. And so, you know, if the idea is like just getting folks understanding, like, what is the work that we're doing? How does it relate to climate? Like, you might focus on the tangible and the things like we're talking about, like Fatima's mentioning here, like there's frames that we can relate to, and there's practices like the gardening that we can go to as a way of discussing sort of the work, right? But then there's also like trying to actually increase people's understanding of the dynamics in which their work is taking place. And so I've had some experience doing some presentations to lead into sort of consultation discussions with farm worker communities here in California. And for some of those folks, like, yeah, climate change and global warming specifically as a frame was not something that they were super like versed in. And so having to give like just basic metaphors to explain, okay, you know how in your car, the light comes in and it heats up the inside of the car, but then it can't escape. Like there's this thing happening, and that's happening basically because of these certain gases. One of those is carbon dioxide. So, you know, just that there are times where we do want to explain the science of things, but it doesn't necessarily need to be for the purposes of knowing these jargon terms, but rather to understand why we're doing X, Y, and Z. And then when you explain the way we garden in this natural, traditional way actually puts some of that carbon back into the soil and prevents that effect from happening. So then you're linking the gardening activity to this broader thing. So I guess I just want to distinguish that there are times where we, and at UPI, we say we do meet people where they are, but we never leave them there, right? So the idea is you always start with where people are at, but you don't necessarily make that the horizon of what people can understand, because we can all, learn and expand our knowledge.
Yes, I love that. I love that. And then I think that just the last thing that I have to say about that is also the idea that we want them to know that, because if they're going to be at a meeting and doing advocacy, we want them to feel like they are also, like if we train on advocacy, let's say that's the purpose of it, then you want them to be able to participate in these planning committees, or even like the community needs assessment, right? Most people don't know what the purpose of that is. But we know that it's going to have value for A, B, C, and D. So making sure that people understand when they hear that term, it might equate new policy and money, right? Carbon sequestration could mean, more building more things, that your community needs to get green space. And so I think that there is value in knowing the terms. And I like how you put it, Antonio, is like not leaving them where they're at, but meeting them there.
Mm-hmm.
So back to affirming that, I think that's really important that we understand how we might use these terms, and maybe make a differentiation between what the purpose of this particular terminology is versus this in whatever we develop.
I know Fatima has her hand up. I want to see what.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that, like, thinking about this, I don't know, I guess just trying to maybe take a step back and having a little more like holistic view of it. And I'm reminded of just, a couple of countries that come to mind is like Ecuador and like India, and how they're starting to like pass rights for Mother Nature, right? And protecting like bodies of water or natural resources. And I think that unfortunately the society we're in right now, right, like land values and everything that we do is like antithetical to like taking care of the land per se, right? It's all about like that extractive model. And so I don't know, I guess one thought that I had was perhaps looking at other countries that kind of do this work because they're earth people or they're nature people, you know what I mean? And I feel like, again, like I've been to Ecuador twice, and I feel like over there's just a higher regard and respect and care for nature and what it provides. And so I wonder, and I kind of put that in the chat box too, was like, I wonder how do we maybe incorporate some of that level of protection, like for nature and land beyond the system that currently exists, and not only not explain that beyond that right now.
Well, I definitely, I think I get what you're saying. And another way I see it is that one of the other aspects of this translation work, I think of it as translation again. What's the purpose? So at some points, we want community members to be more versed in some particular jargon or understanding of climate issues, because they're going to engage a policy process that has to use those terms, or because they're going to start a campaign where they need to be vocal in the media and speak a certain language, right? There might be reasons why we need to advance the sort of usage of certain terms. But I would say what you're speaking to is also that often, not always, but oftentimes, our community members include people who are actually more rooted already in those caring for the earth paradigms without having any connection to those terms.
That's
So
right.
one way we can do both basically is to always something we try to do is always start from the assumption, or at least the statement, like being overt, that we know that folks here already have some of these ideas. You already know a lot, right? To validate the fact that folks in the community already know a lot about these issues. They just don't necessarily know these terms. They don't know necessarily, like I was talking about with global warming, how exactly does this thing work, right? But they have a lot of tangible knowledge that relates to it. Like when we started talking about climate in this one example, all these workers said, oh yeah, 15 years ago when I first started working here, it was foggy from June to August. Now there's all these sunny days that never used to be there, right? And so they know specifically about climate change. They just don't have those languages. So being able to
Yeah, and
validate the knowledge
and
and
I
the
and I and I do think that again, you know, like 80% of culture is language, right? And so I think that just some of the work that I've done around the gardens here in Sacramento, namely, you know, we've had this challenge with what I'll call like the non-English gardens, right? And then in the non-English gardens, you know, you have your Russian, your Hmong, your Spanish, your South Asian, right? I mean, they're gardeners, right? A lot of the Hmong immigrants, you know, from the part of the world that they came from, you know, the rule was if you don't grow food, you don't eat, right? So again, so a lot of these folks that come here, they have this talent. They just need the land. And then some of the land that they're on, then the city doesn't like the way that they garden. So they want to deprive them of their cultural practices and say, oh no, we don't like the way it looks, right? And so they want to institutionalize the city operated garden, and then want to again, you know, dictate what it looks like, how high things can be, what can be where. And so it's all this like power and control, because it's like, well, people are already doing and meeting their needs. And oftentimes, you know, the system comes down and just says, no, can't, and don't, you know what I mean? Versus trying to find ways to allow for this to happen. And so we've fought hard, at least here with the city of Sacramento, that has tried to shut down a non-English garden, I'll say specifically, right? Because these people don't speak English, but they're master gardeners of their own. Same thing with the Twin Rivers Unified School District. You know, 20 years, there was another garden, they were gardening. School district came down and tried to use the excuse of the water crisis we had a few years ago, or maybe many years ago now. And, you know, we fought hard. We said, no, the water crisis said, stop watering your lawn, but it exempted growing food. So even how the laws are used against non-English speaking communities is, I think, quite discriminatory. So sorry, I know that's not what we're talking about here, but I just kind of wanted to bring that into the conversation, that like communities have that knowledge. They just need the space to be able to do the things that they're already doing and that they know how to do.
And I mean, I think it is, yeah, it's your comment is like slightly adjacent to the focus of this language terminology stuff, but I think it's very relevant, of course. I mean, I think what we're trying to do, hopefully, is figuring out ways that we are going to basically allow and support people's advocacies for themselves so that we can prevent this kind of oppression from happening, which not always, but often is linked to the fact that people can't engage those systems of power because of language. Victoria?
Right.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree, because, you know, especially in Sacramento, where Fatima and I are, you know, Vietnamese gardens as well are shut down in that way. But giving them these metaphors and something tangible that they can understand, and then giving them that translation, right? So like you said, starting with the foggy days, well, what people do understand here is that they're sick, right? That they're ill, that they have poor air quality, and that they have asthma in their neighborhood, right? Starting with something they can understand and then moving it towards climate change instead of the other way around. Like, hey, did you know global warming is happening? And that's why you have poor air quality with all these combined factors. Instead saying, you know, do you know someone who has asthma? Do you have asthma? Well, yeah, they do if I'm working with them, right? And in that garden situation, when you have that backup and you say, yeah, my garden doesn't look the way you want it to because it has, because it's overcrowded and it has large stakes that are made of, you know, reused and salvaged materials that the city doesn't like to see, but saying, well, this is what's helping us clean the air in our neighborhood. This is what's sequestering our carbon. If they could come back with those terms that we're lending to them in ways that they can understand, then that's going to help them save their gardens. That's going to help them, you know, push their policy. It's going to help me plant more trees and make them healthier. I did add arbolas earlier a little bit up there, because sequestering carbon is a really great way to get funded right now in the United States, right? Carbon zero is getting money thrown at it left and right. So if we want to start with that, you know, knowing that it's important to understand what sequestering carbon does for your body and your health, that's a really important way to meet people where they are and then level up, right? Sorry, I went off on a tangent too. Sorry.
Natalie, did you I just wanted, because I want to make sure we're attentive to time. We're at 11:30.
Yeah.
And just, do you want to go into this, the review of the website, or keep talking in this way, or just?
Right. Well, I'm curious if we can hear from a few folks that haven't spoke up. We're sorry, other people who have spoke up, but I know Nancy, if you wanted to have anything additional to say, besides the glossary, and not the glossary, the link you shared. Felipe, Karina, did you want to add anything? Beatrice, I see Beatrice is in the room.
Well, for my community, right now we're working on a community steering committee with AB 617. And so what we do is that we have the meetings with AB 617, but then a lot of the terms are too technical for the community to understand. So we created a separate focus group that just does a simple summary of what happened on the AB 617 meetings. And the meetings are given in Spanish and in English for translation. So then the focus group just does the same. It's on English and Spanish, and it just simplifies all of the terms for us youth, but also for the community in Spanish. And it just gives a simple summary of everything that happened, because the meetings do tend to be long. So it's a simple summary of what happened with simple terms and with community members in order for them to share their voices. Just because most of the times in those spaces, you often see the agencies taking space and not the residents, that they kind of feel like they do not want to share because they do not know the technical terms, or as what we call fancy words. So we always tell them that you know your experiences, but we know that it could be intimidating when you hear a lot of people saying those technical terms, and you want to do the same, but you only share your experiences. And that's what we're motivating our community to do. And so far, I think that it's been doing great at the moment.
And I would just like to say that thanks for all that I've heard this morning, because when in the communities that I will be involved in, usually we'll have an interpreter to start off with, but we have to do translate the surveys or the information so that we can get further into a cultural competency where everybody can really understand and feel that they are involved. So some of these sites that you're quoting will be very good for me, because I've just been going along with how the other organizations have been doing and utilizing their translators. So this will be helpful for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Beatrice. That reminded me of the comment, I think, in our last session about, you can't just have an interpreter in an event that was not actually advertised in the language of the people who need that interpretation, right? So being attentive to all the different places where translation might be needed.
Yeah, and that's true. Mm-hmm. So when we go out into the community, start off with our address and in their culture and how they perceive things. And as someone says, start where they are.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we have a short activity for all of us to look at this website that I don't even know if you knew existed. We have a Spanish translated website for PACE. Our intention was knowing that a lot of the communities, frontline communities we work with, speak different languages, not just only Spanish, but Korean, Mandarin, Filipino, Tagalog, different languages, and we couldn't encompass all of them in the PACE program, but we thought we could pilot something where we try to provide like bilingual resources for Spanish and English. And so, especially with Antonio and I being like the two co-facilitators, I think Michelle also speaks some Spanish, to help get materials that we're creating for the PACE cohort for you all translated in Spanish. So we didn't know what this would look like, and we're still figuring it out. But one of the things we did was translate the website into Spanish. So if folks wanted to learn about the program. And we even had like a Spanish application, and we had a few folks apply to that. Yeah, that is our first steps. And we're curious what you think of it as you scroll through this website. I'll put it in the chat. And then an activity would be just to look at your bios and tell us what you think of your bios. That's in where it says colectivo, which we took to mean cohort.
Yeah, and I think that's an example, right, where we didn't do you didn't do an exact translation of cohort.
Yes, sorry, I should explain that. So yeah, in Spanish, in Lingui, it was saying like cohorte was the name that folks used for cohort direct translation, but I was talking to different people in the field and they were saying colectivo, this just means like a collective, is a more common term when like folks gather to like create an ensemble like over a shared interest. So that's what we decided to use. The other thing that I should mention as a good example is like partners advancing climate equity translates to like socios, which is like literally business partners advancing climate equity, or even like avanzando. And so we did have conversations about like compañeros, which is more like friends and colleagues. And we decided to go with that word instead. So thanks, Antonio, for bringing up those two conversations we did have about the translation over this.
And that's just an example of how what we were talking about at the beginning of just that it's not just about direct translation needs, but also about figuring out how to actually speak about what we mean, even if it's not a direct translation. Compañeros is like friends or colleagues, or it has multiple meanings, but it's essentially a little bit, it's less formal as cohort, which is very much like the cohort.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to add that just the way that we think about language is key and essential to everything we're doing in terms of liberation and in terms of transformation in society. I mean, in a way, languages are, it's sort of like an analogy with other things that have happened to people, where languages have been taken away from people, where language is how people experience the world and learn in their language and live in their language. And English has become, kind of the world dominant language, which is analogous to how Europeans have colonized and dominated the world. And so I just think it's really important to keep spending time thinking about and making events and organizations and information as accessible as possible. And it does take huge amounts of time, but I just keep thinking to, the kind of society that I want to live in, that I think we want to live in, is one that's not going to be focused on endless economic growth, but we can endlessly grow in terms of intelligence and creativity and human capacity and things like that. And I would just love to see jobs being created that are utilizing and valuing the language resources that we have in the world. And I just keep thinking, is that something that foundations can get behind, to be providing funding for interpretation, for events? But again, most of how interpretation gets carried out is not very inclusive, or just, usually it's on the side, or the language that's being interpreted into, people have to wait for that, and then they miss what's happening, right there. So however any of this can be turned on end, I think is really helpful. Like making English speakers wait for the interpretation is a really good thing to do when possible.
So Nancy, thank you. These were some of the things that we wanted to make sure we touch on. We were going to have a sort of point towards the end to talk about language justice as a sort of broader frame, right? Because it's not just about terms. Just like you said, a structure of having an event that's in English with Spanish translation is very different from having a structure where it's a Spanish language event with English translation. So, right, there's these different interventions, and you talked about foundations. So I definitely wanted us to get into that at some point. I guess we could bounce around, but just want to reference that's something we really did want to talk about, other strategies, other things to think about beyond just the translation of materials.
We also use the promotores, the outreach workers, and that's been very helpful with the different programs and have them involved as we go out into the communities because they are, part of the culture, and that has been very successful. So that's another source that we'll be using.
Fatima has her hand up.
Okay, I'll be quick. I just wanted to put a few more things on maybe for future discussion. The first one is around, I had the opportunity to go to Germany back in the day, and I was really fascinated with the governance structure in the European Union, where they have like 20 plus languages, and the way that they conduct business, like, I mean, they had it going on with the way in which you could call like a number or have like a live operator or interpreter in your language. And so, I mean, imagine if like a lot of these public meetings, like, first of all, it's so hard to find them. And then, you know what I mean? Like engage with them because they're all in English. But just thinking about like, I mean, I went to Walmart the other day and the pharmacy had a list of all these languages. Maybe I'll share it with you all. But it was like, point to your language. And at least like the county and like the health field kind of understands the culturally and linguistically like appropriate services when it comes to healthcare. But I think that that definitely needs to kind of, filter over into just government and governance. The other thing around language that I want to talk about was, we talked about Campaniero. So that word, like you said, is friend or colleague. And so I started thinking about like how, again, in let's say non-white cultures, right? This idea of kinship or family or relative. So like in my culture, right, everyone's a sister or uncle or brother. And even maybe in the African American culture, right, it's like, what's up, fam, or, cousin, or, just how people relate to one another, right? So it's the language of family, right, and relativity or whatever. But then on the flip side of the coin, I thought it was really interesting. So again, now when we go into government or now like a public service, you have this idea of cronyism or nepotism that we're also trying to curb when, I'll just say most recently, the Trump family in the White House and all the relatives that they had, employed, which can lead to corruption. So I just think that that is an interesting point of conversation, maybe for a future table for us, of just thinking about language of family versus what happens when you actually do employ your family. And you know what I mean? So anyway, so I just thought that was kind of funny.
Interesting.
Yeah, I wanted to add that for me, the work around, this is Ileana, by the way, the work around building this kind of glossary or talking about these technical terms and what best suits our communities is really like step one. When I think about the potential of having something like this, it's quite strong and can be quite impactful because it's like when we are all speaking the same language or when we are all understanding the same terms, even though our communities may not be geographically connected, but if we're all speaking off the same sheet of music, so to say, then when it comes time to take collective action for a policy or for a statewide or national kind of equitable policy, we don't have to do, we're already miles ahead in that we don't have to explain, as we're saying now, what is climate change? What is the greenhouse gas effect? It's like we've kind of already laid that groundwork in our communities organically, started those discussions, taken the time to have those extra lengthy discussions around the concepts and how they build together so that we're ready to accelerate collective action at a much quicker pace. And I find that notion of this work very exciting and I think also very transformative.
I think Anita has her hand up.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ileana. I think that's profound. And I love the idea of all of us getting, being on the same page, and it really is at the core of, really addressing the equity issues here, in terms of access and language understanding and all of that. But I also wanted to, I've also come from the model of, just because it comes top down doesn't mean that it's correct, right? And so there's this concept of back translation, right? The idea that you actually translate the language into English, like Nancy was saying. And and I feel like that back translation part is really at the beginning of this, is like, how do you talk about this? And it's part of that needs assessment, is like, how does your community talk about these? What are the terms that come up? And then rather than saying you should know carbon sequestration, we figure out what they're talking about. Say, did you know that there is a word that's in English and scientific, but it's the same thing. So you should teach them what that word is so that they know what it is, and stop using the scientific term, right? So there is some elements and some advocacy there also to support empowering community to speak about issues in climate action, climate change that does not conform, and that we ask that the conversation changes at that leadership level as well, so that we are meeting somewhere in between. And what's leading it is how communities are talking about this, not how science is talking about this.
I think that's a very great point.
Yeah.
I have more I want to say about it, but let's see if Felipe actually has anything to add from their experience before we move on to the next part.
Hi, everybody. Hey, everybody. Yeah, I've been listening and just very awesome work that y'all doing. Just trying to take it in and learning from y'all. Because it's really important. I know for us, it's really important as well. To my experiences, it's something that is our core of the work that we do. Anytime there's a meeting, we want to make sure it's in Spanish. And a nice practice that we like to have is the agencies, before they present, we ask them for the presentation, so we can just make sure like the language they're going to be using, yeah, actually makes sense. Because there's been times where they're using presentation and we're like, no, that's not it. So that's been very helpful. And something else I think is also helpful is when the members help facilitate the discussions with agencies. So in the past, we've done planning events where the agency comes in and our members also co-lead the breakout sessions. So that's very useful because the members are kind of able to talk about these issues and members feel more comfortable talking on them, but members, they know the lingo to use, because we know Spanish is very regional. Sometimes I don't understand the words because I'm Guatemala and like my Spanish is different than the Spanish from Mexico. So I say one word like, what are you saying? Oh my bad. You say differently in Mexico. So I think it's really good to really use members that are from the same region. And I guess just pushing each other to do better job at just language translation. Right now, we're doing some work with the Filipino community, so they're helping us translate our documents. So we're just asking, can you translate this document, and we'll put it on social media. We're doing it for COVID, but yeah, just working with community members because they know the language best.
That's great. Antonio, did you have something to add?
No, I was just looking to try to help you with note taking, because I thought there was one key point I thought there was recognizing that even within languages like Spanish, there are differences between different regions, and just being attentive to all the levels of sort of translation that need to be done, I think is key.
Okay. Did you want me to add that right here?
I was about to add that, but I have a hard time keeping up with typing. So I know Victoria's on stack. I want to make sure, because we only have about 12 minutes, and we did have this whole list of terms that Natalie had started going through, and we wanted to actually have some time, hopefully, to like really dig into the terms. It seems like we might want to set up a separate session for that, because we've been developing a lot more of the sort of broader approaches and strategies and points to pay attention to, which I think is also wonderful. So I don't know, Natalie, how you feel, but I felt like it might be hard to actually substantively go through that list in the 10 minutes, and also still have some time for some of these broader language justice issues. So,
well, let's try a few of them. Maybe let's try like climate justice, social justice, environmental justice. How's that? And I just want to say, like, this is a huge interest of mine, and like I think an outcome of the PACE program that I want to see is like a collective glossary that we develop and can share on our resource library. So this is going to be a continued document, and we'll try to think of a way where we either come together in another conversation to like dig in these terms, or we just keep adding to them as we're going through the cohort. But I'm going to, I guess with Antonio, be leading this and like trying to develop it.
Well, one thing is we had talked before about how throughout those sessions, new terms might come up, or things that we like community needs assessment that we realize we need to figure out how we're going to translate, or if we do. So we want you all to be able to add both terms that you're not sure about or that you'd like to explore on this list, as well as your own sort of interpretation or what you've used in the past. I mean, I would say, I don't know, I just think in 10 minutes is going to be hard to like really dig into even one of these. I would say it makes, for me, makes more sense if people add on their thoughts like on this document, or somehow maybe we reflect it. We can have people download different thoughts and translations all together, and then we can come together and discuss how those look in relationship. That's, to me, that would give us more time to really like get all the things on the table, so to speak, including more terms that we might want to address, and then we could come together to like we look at it and we'd have a lot of sort of source material. That would be my proposal, just because then we would actually have enough time to like actually get it to them.
Yeah, to be honest, like the facilitators are always like, we need more time. What worked for you all? So I'm going to put like another section here that's like action steps too. I mean, Antonia and I proposed a couple of different things, but what works?
Are you saying from this session? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you proposed something, and curious to hear what
it does sound like people are interested in having the more detailed conversation on terms. If that's how I interpreted comments, but I don't know if that was. Yeah, does anyone, I know Victoria had her hand up before, but did anybody have any? Because yeah, we just have, I know we're supposed to only go till noon today, so we don't have.
I'm adding my notes onto the document directly, but also the Spanish dict that was in the chat has a really great social justice explanation with a lot of like different sentences, like examples of how you can use it in a sentence. So that was the first one that I looked up using the Spanish dict, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I actually like that one too, because they'll give you the pronunciation. It's a little bit more colorful.
And you can hear it too. You can push the button and hear what it sounds like. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, let me write that in here.
Yeah, I mean, one challenge is we didn't have another supplementary session already set up for this, so we do have to figure out if we were going to extend or do another session, when and how that would be.
I think the office hours are a great idea to maybe incorporate some of these follow-up conversations.
And just to say, the reason why I was thinking about deferring the nitty gritty of the terms was both because then we could allow people to sort of put in stuff, like just on their own time in the document before we have the conversation. But also because, yeah, I think that there's more also to talk about in terms of this issue of language justice, where we haven't even gotten to this. I guess someone mentioned Europe, and there's some comparisons about like how atrocious our government systems are in terms of knowing that there's a lot of languages used within our residents in our political communities but not providing those resources regularly. So that's one thing I wanted to make sure we brought up, was discussing how do we actually get it more normalized to expect there to be actual substantive uh, consideration to languages. And so whether that's, we talked about, getting this into local government budgets where translation and interpretation services are actually included regularly for them. Mandating, I know in San Francisco is pretty good about this, like mandating that all of these different public facing materials have to be in particular languages, rather than making it the responsibility essentially of community-based organizations to then do that translation work. There are, I don't know any ones off the top, I couldn't find the link, but there are organizations that do specific translation for environmental organizations and sometimes operate on a sliding scale. And I wanted to mention, I had this experience of going to La Via Campesina's international conference in 2017, which encompasses, people from 80 countries. And there was simultaneous translation in 15 languages for the proceedings. And this is a movement organization, not a governmental group. And that was all because they have sort of volunteer interpreter, sort of committed members of the movement. And so there's a lot more details to that, but the point is, I know it's possible and been done in places to leverage existing sort of volunteer energy to coordinate and organize very, very detailed, complicated kinds of meetings and translations. And so, yeah, just that there's other things that we can think about as means towards sort of achieving language justice beyond just the nitty gritty terms. So want to make sure we just give space to surface any of those other strategies or ideas that people have.
Yeah, I was also going to add what we create could possibly, we could figure out a way to get others' inputs, not just PACE leaders. So an organized way, we're all strapped for time, right? And I'm sure that there's other folks that we know that do this work that could input some other terms into this climate equity guide in Spanish. I have like a Slack group that I help run called Latinx Ambulantistas. And so like that could be a way to crowdsource some terms. And yeah, just curious what people also think about that.
I would love to invite my partner, United Latinos, to chime in because they have a lot of different languages. Like the person I work with is from Honduras. And then just regionally here in Sacramento, there's like 10 different ways. I'm sure you could say all of these things. I would love to invite him to work on the doc if you're okay with that.
I am. Can I get a hand raise or objections from others if they have a concern with that? See thumbs up. Okay.
Thank you for the heart, Fatima.
Okay, did you want to add anything else? Antonia, did we give enough time to language access and justice?
We have like 2 minutes if anyone has anything else that we haven't really touched on in terms of like strategies or things to consider that are beyond the direct translation.
Nancy, did you want to explain the link you shared?
Sure. So I had also sent something to the news this week. They have this organization, Sustaining All Life, that I've worked with extensively, is putting on 6 events coming up around Earth Day month. And it's a group that really values inclusivity and uses a term called language liberation. And often events are interpreted into several languages. It's all volunteer interpretation, not necessarily at all professional, but just a big emphasis on people who are presenting, learning to monitor their speech and speak slower and speak in shorter phrases so that it's easier to interpret, and then instituting a policy of about every 20 minutes actually pausing everything and just having a minute of silence so that everybody can kind of rest their brains, but especially the people that are doing the work of waiting and listening to interpreted language. So just a real value at inclusivity and the need for that, especially to build a movement that's going to be broad enough to protect life. And the workshops are really interesting. If anybody has time to check out yet another event, they're highly recommended.
Well, this is awesome. So Antonio and I are like the co-facilitators for this bilingual piece of the cohort that we're piloting, and hope to support you all in this work. Please reach out to us if you have any questions or like other suggestions, but I think it's our goal to continue having these conversations, but also just continue building out this climate equity guide in Spanish.
Yeah. Anita, you're muted.
Thank you.
Yeah, and definitely, I mean, I think we have a lot of resources already, but hopefully we'll figure out ways that throughout the whole program, we'll be able to sort of flesh these out and make them another useful resource for our resource list.
And then we could get started on the urban dictionary, right? The young people's terminology and making the government speak like they do.
Well, I saw Nancy's list had bullshit tonterias on it. That was a good, make sure you have important terms like that.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, like I can imagine like in, maybe it's just Mexican American culture, like they use like a chancla or like a shoe to like signify if you've done something bad, and like that could be an urban dictionary thing. We could incorporate emojis into this. I could see.
They don't have that on your emoji con. What is it, emoji dictionary? They don't have like the Mexican versions?
No, but maybe we can tell Emoji Con that they should do that. I don't know. I love emojis. Like I'm always using them. So I'm open to incorporating that into our urban dictionary. Okay.
Love it. Pace dictionary. Let's do it.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.